Great.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Gonzo Experience. I am David Gonzo Mamano. So glad that you're sharing some heartbeats with us here today. Really appreciate your time. I know there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of content out there, and you are here with me today. Means the world to me. And if you like the Gonzo Experience, guess what? Every Wednesday morning, I have a new show for 5 years now. So this is the most consistent thing I have ever done in my entrepreneurial journey because I love it so much. Today, I have on the show a great guest who's going to really help us when it comes to maximizing and realizing the importance of not going at it alone. You know, working in peer groups, working in groups. There's power in teams, right? And so today, they have a show. I have a great guest, Leo Bottary. Leo, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be part of the Gonzo Experience.
You know, I hope you enjoy the experience. You let me know at the end here. I try not to rough you up too bad, but it should be okay. So,
all right.
You're such a believer in peer groups in collaboration that your name of your company is Peer Innovation, right? Which I like the name. And so I know that you are you're an award-winning author. You've written 3 books. You've done a lot of work in the study and the execution of the power of peers, which happens to be one of the name of your book. You like that? And so tell us, who you are, what you do, and how your superpowers of helping people can help the listeners and viewers of the Gonzo Experience.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So yes, I'm founder and managing partner of a company called Peer Innovation, and we work both with helping teams be higher performing inside their companies, as well as I do a lot of work with peer groups to help those peer groups truly maximize and squeeze the most valuable possible out of that experience. My probably first peer group experience, to be honest, was actually I was with Vistage as an employee there between 2010 and 2016. But prior to that, between 2006 and 2008, I had gone back to graduate school quite late, actually. I was at Seton Hall University in a strategic communication and leadership program that was done, and we learned as a cohort, which was completely different than anything I had experienced going to school prior to that when I was in high school or when I went straight to college, where, collaborative learning was basically called cheating. Back in those days. So all of a sudden now here we are and we can learn from one another. And the expectation actually from the professors is that you'd probably learn most from one another, second from the material, and third, whatever you can pick up from us, great. And they would not regard that as anything other than exactly what they intended. And it was such a powerful learning experience for me that when I went to Vistage, and I was, of course, intrigued by the value proposition where they basically assemble and facilitate peer groups for CEOs and business leaders in about 20 countries around the world, to go there and see really firsthand the incredible benefit that everyone got from participating in these groups, only to learn, when you really look at it, because, hey, this Vistage, YPO, EO, there's a whole host of companies, Renaissance out there doing these groups. But if you look at it in the scheme of how many CEOs and business leaders there are out there, there's like a minuscule number of them that participate in these peer groups, despite how unbelievably effective they are. So that's why I want to try to raise awareness of it so more people, entrepreneurs, and really business leaders of all levels can take advantage of them.
Yeah, so I was in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, which you mentioned. And there's many. There's YEO, there's YPO.
EIEIO,
there's all these, right? Yeah. Well, YEO became EO. I meant to say YPO. There used to be WPO, and then Vistage, which used to be called Tech, right? It's all these different names. Renaissance, there's a lot of them out there. I started a one for smaller small business entrepreneurs called the Avanti Entrepreneur Network, and so I was going at it alone. I started my first company back in 1995, and I was 26, and what the hell did I know? I didn't get my MBA, and I just, you kind of like, you start to build a business, and then you say, oh, geez, I'm having these problems. I need a person like this. And they're like, yeah, Dave, that's called a human resources director. I'm like, oh, okay. So you kind of just learn by trial by fire. And then I was reading Inc. magazine. I saw an ad for EO, and I was like, oh my God, I could surround myself with other entrepreneurs. I go, that's what I need to bring me to the next level. And it was incredible. So, anybody that doesn't know about EO, and a lot of the groups are the same Vistage. The core value is these peer groups. In EO, they called it forum. And we'd get
Yes.
together once a month with like 8 to 12, entrepreneurs. And it was private. It was a private, confidential group. So we could talk about anything without fear of it getting out. And we weren't, in EO, we were not allowed to give advice, right, in these
Right.
groups. We could only, they called it the Gestalt method, where we
That's
could only
right.
do experience sharing. Because who likes to be given advice, right? We automatically get a little defensive, like, who are you to tell me what to do? But instead, I would say, Leo, I went through something like that, and here's what I did. Or I know somebody that had a similar situation, and here's how they handled it. And then it's like, oh, I'm taking notes and see, kind of learned how other people, conquered these situations. It was so helpful, right? And that gave me became a big believer in the power of peer groups. And it really became, like, just don't go at, why would you go at it alone? Right? When you can learn from so many great people. So now what do you do now? Do you go into companies and do you help them find peer groups to join, or do you form peer groups for companies?
No, actually, two things. One, I continue to work with peer advisory groups, primarily Vistage groups right now, to help them maximize that experience like we talked about, and especially with brand new groups. And that's a lot of fun because when people join a peer group like this, they kind of think they know what they joined, but they're not really all that certain about what it takes to really contribute and really to get the most out of it, because they represent the intellectual and emotional capital in whatever room they're in together. And so learning how to really capitalize on that is really important. So I do a lot of work with new groups and, of course, very experienced groups, but I also work with teams, basically applying the same principles. The things that peer advisory groups do so incredibly well can also be applied to teams inside of our company. So I get people to really use a framework that has been developed and advanced since the original book in 2016, so they can have intentional conversations that don't tell anybody what to do. I don't walk in and talk about what they should or shouldn't do or anything like that. I just allow them to have purposeful, intentional conversations where they can determine that for themselves. But at least they get a sense of clarity and understanding about, where they want to go and what they want, and who they want to be when they grow up. And, so there's that. I would say the third element, though, which I think is really important, and I think more companies are understanding, that groups and teams working side by side can be incredibly powerful. When you think about the difference between a group and a group really assembles to provide benefit to the individual members and or their organizations. A team comes together to create a shared work product or for a purpose that only a team can accomplish together. So when you have groups, you can actually, when you consider the nearly, what is it, like $400 billion being spent in learning and development around the world, with no real mechanism to actually apply any of this stuff, in your individual or, life or your teams, groups can be incredibly powerful mechanism to be able to do that, so that you can actually make stronger individual contributors to your teams by using groups. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next 5 years.
Well, we could do it more easily now too around the world, right? Because of Zoom, et cetera, Microsoft Teams, whatever you're using. So, when I was in EO, my group was in my home city of Rochester, New York. But I'm actually in some, nothing formally structured, but some mastermind groups online, that we meet weekly, and they're, people are all over the world, and it's fantastic. My world has gotten so much smaller because of these. First of all, the concept of peer groups, and then second of all, because. And I'll thank COVID because of it, but it's so much more acceptable to meet over Zoom now. It's no big deal, right?
It's great. In fact, the other day, I began my day with an early morning call with the gentleman from the Netherlands. And then I had a 4:00 call that day. Of course, it was the following morning in Australia. And then another couple of hours later, a call with China. And so to your point, you play a little time zone hopscotch, and you can connect with people from all over. And it's become so much easier to do that. For all of the complaints of Zoom and whatever platform you're using, I remind people from time to time that had the pandemic taken place at the same time as the 2008 financial crisis, there was no Zoom, there was no Slack, there was no Microsoft Teams. We would have been screwed. Everyone would have been dialing into conference calls, with a phone up to their ear. So I think at some level, we should have a bit of gratitude for some of the tools we do have, use our imagination for how to leverage them. And I certainly understand the impatience about wanting to be face to face. I get that. But at the same time, we got to put our big boy and big girl pants on and just kind of say, hey, let's use what we've got to our advantage here.
Well, that's a great way to look at it. That's it's a great perception, and it's a great just being grateful for like what we have, the tools that we have, because you're right. I mean, I think so. I have kids in school. I have 2 kids in high school and 1 in 4th grade, and there's, especially when we were under some pretty severe lockdown earlier. Thank God for these online tools where they could continue school, but also continue relationships with their friends. And I think I'm a child of the 80s. Graduated high school way back in 1987. And, listen, if the pandemic happened then, we'd be SOL. How would I go to school? Right.
Right.
We had the rotary phone that was attached to the wall, I mean, and only one person at a time we could talk. Right. And so it would have been like solitary confinement almost. Right.
It was imperfect, certainly. But, you think about how quickly we had to pivot. I think by and large, people did a pretty admirable job of being able to pivot and do that. But the reality is that when you're trying to take an in-person experience and simply pull it over and replicate it online, it's never going to work. You've got to tear it apart and build an online experience that helps you achieve, some of the same goals. Is the only way you're going to make that happen. And of course, there wasn't a lot of time to do anything like that. It was that fast that we've got to move. So I think, whether it was education or business, we all, it was a bit of, a step back before we could start taking 2 steps forward. But I was always amazed, especially in the early going, when CEOs in these groups that I'd be leading, and they would talk to me about the fact that, they wouldn't have chosen this in a million years, but wow, productivity is up like after 60 days, after 90 days, after 120 days, and up significantly. And now they recognized, however, and a lot of the savvy ones, realized that this isn't sustainable without really changing a lot of things about the way we support our folks working from home. But I think they learned a lot about their people, and I think they learned a lot about what's possible when it comes to remote work. And again, I think a lot of people are making some really positive strides forward in that regard. Your mic's out, David. There you go.
All right, am I back?
Yep.
I'm back. All right, that's odd. Well, thank you for letting me know. We are starting again. So tell me about how you help entrepreneurs structure these peer groups. Like there's, I remember in EO, we had a very specific format that we had to follow. And we had somebody that was kind of would do a little ding if we got off the format. Tell me about the format that you suggest for the people that you work with.
Well, before I get into format, I think purpose really matters. I think forming peer groups inside companies that aren't very specifically directed as to why they exist is not typically a great idea. So if there's a strategic initiative that you want to get alignment on, that's one thing. If you're trying to create a mechanism for learning and development, that's another. If you're trying to see to it that you're getting all that you can out of your diversity and inclusion initiatives, all of those kinds of things, and being purposeful about that. I think what you're talking about, of course, is the protocol for people bringing questions and bringing, quote, issues, topics, challenges, opportunities to the table, and having a process to go about that. And I do think the process is good. At Vistage, they happen to refer to it as issue processing. And it's basically bringing a how do I question to the table. And people then ask you clarifying questions with basically the purpose being, is that person asking the right question or not? Are they addressing some kind of a symptom, or are we at the core issue here? And you ask them why it's important to them, what they've done about it thus far. And again, just try to get as much information as possible, not so much for the purpose of giving advice as you mean, or to come to a solution, but to find out, precisely what it is we're talking about here. And, like I said, in the case of EO, they tend to share, well, not tend to, I mean, the rule basically, Gestalt method is you share experiences um, versus give advice. I think YPO, I remember talking to the CEO of YPO a few years ago, who's telling me they're out of the advice giving business entirely, because of what they believe it does in terms of psychological safety. Again, my view on that, while I understand that quite a bit, I also recognize, and I don't go into peer groups telling them what's right for them or not. There's a lot of peer groups that flat out want an environment where they want people to give them advice, period, as opposed to having advice cloaked in experiences. But you've got to set those ground rules, and you've got to do it in a way and have the kind of psychological safety that allows for that conversation to not be disruptive, or have people's feelings hurt, or have people feel like they're being challenged in a way that's unfair. So I think agreeing on the ground rules, whatever they may happen to be, is probably most essential. And using that time in a way that serves whatever the purpose of the group is, which is why I kind of mentioned that at the beginning, in terms of what are we here for, and how are we going to leverage this time together, and how are we going to make sure that we can demonstrate positive outcomes and an ROI to a senior leadership team who is basically authorizing these groups to exist inside their companies.
Very interesting. So, that's great as far as like, getting defined on the why of the peer group. And then as far as like, for also, let's say for small business entrepreneurs, let's say that they just want to start their own peer group, right? They want to get, try to get like 8 to 10 people meeting once a week. I know our mutual friend Alexander uses something very innovative called Circles, which is pretty cool.
Yes, Dan Hoffman's platform. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so that, because I participated in that once, and that was pretty awesome. I mean, but people are using Zoom, they're using Teams, right? And maybe, especially after the pandemic, if they're local, they want to get together in person. How would you? I mean, besides reading your books, which we'll certainly mention, what are some startup steps for young, I'll say small business entrepreneurs, beginning stage entrepreneurs to start the process?
It's a great book that actually covers that very question, is True North Groups, that was written by Bill George and Doug Baker back in 2011. And they talk about getting a collection of people together who and beginning, a peer group, and thinking about how it is we're going to spend time together. How do we get to know one another as human beings as well as fellow entrepreneurs, number one. And what do we want to accomplish, and how do we go about dividing the time that we have together in a way that's going to be most advantageous to us? So again, I think it's different for everyone. And one of the things that we do with Peer Innovation is we have a conversation around 5 factors that drive what I refer to as a robust learning achieving cycle. This idea that we learn better when we learn together. We know that. And when we learn and share, and then give one another both the courage and the encouragement to act and apply that learning, and we've achieved results from it, this is a cycle we want to repeat. And if that's kind of the engine, I think the fuel for that engine becomes these 5 factors, which are having the right people in the room, which you determine based on what you share in terms of, maybe you're the chief decision maker, maybe you're the entrepreneur, maybe you're a mid-level executive, whatever, but you share that place in some of those common challenges. You share some social values about what it takes to be a good contributor, and come to agreement on those things when it comes to the group. And hopefully you've got some good diversity there, which allows for, different thoughts to be able to brought to the table. Second is psychological safety, which we obviously read a lot about now that Google and Project Aristotle has put it into our business lexicon, right? We look at productivity. what are we bringing to the group and what true takeaways is everyone receiving from it? Give everyone all the psychological safety in the world, but unless I'm getting tangible things out of the experience, it's not something you're going to do for a whole long time. That there is a culture of accountability, and not an accountability that is onerous or puts people like on the defensive. The idea is that we're all helping one another just achieve what we've already expressed we want for ourselves, and to know you have teammates in that regard. And then finally is on the leadership front, that whoever's leading the group, whether that is a leader, as a member, rotating leadership a member, paid facilitator, whatever it happens to be, the role is pretty much the same. Being that servant leader and being a steward of those other four factors. And I think that is a good conversational framework to begin a conversation around why do we exist? Who should we have in the group, and what should we be paying attention to so that we're healthy going forward?
That's great. And so I want to talk about your three books here too. So your first book, which you co-authored with Leon Shapiro, who at the time was CEO of Vistage, right?
CEO of Vistage, yeah.
Yep, called The Power of Peers, How the Company You Keep Drives Leadership, Growth, and Success. That came out in 2016. That explored why peer groups for CEOs and business leaders are so effective. Your second book, What Anyone Can Do, How Surrounding Yourself with the Right People Will Drive Change, Opportunity, and Personal Growth. It came out in 2018. That book examined the power of enlisting and engaging the complete circle of people who surround us to get what we want in life. So you've written two books.
And then the third book is Peer Innovation, the last one, 2020.
Peer Innovation, yes. Yep.
And that's really what peer advisory groups can teach us about building high-performing teams. And that basically advances the original work done in The Power of Peers and uses the experiences, again, from about 200 workshops throughout North America and the UK, and take those findings and not only use it to help peer groups even be that much more effective, but also to be able to translate and transfer a lot of this to teams in our organizations. And, I think particularly cross-functional work teams, if you think about it, it's the most like a peer group in that you may work for the same company, but the people around the table are looking at that company through a very different lens, right? It's marketing, finance, sales, HR, whatever it happens to be. And when they come to that meeting, they can't be the king or queen of their department there to protect their people and their budget and whatever program they want to do over the next 3 to 5 years. They have to be there, as stewards of the enterprise who happen to look at the world through marketing, HR, sales, and all of that. And that's a tricky thing to do. But again, once you can start building a culture around that, that respects that, I think it can be enormously powerful. I read a thing a number of years ago that I thought was really funny. And I think the article in HBR was called Smart Rules. And in it, they talked about a cross-functional work team coming together and the marketing person being asked about the finance person. Hey, what do you think the finance person does all day? Because I have no idea, right? They're supposed to work with each other, depend on each other and all. And the marketing guy, if he's a smart ass, might just say, oh, he says no to me all the time. That's pretty much what he knows. And then what does he think? Well, the guy's kind of a jerk. And then this all goes around various assumptions and various things on this because no one actually, they don't know what each other does. They don't have conversations about it. They don't really, there's no real collaboration, which is why they refer to those cross-functional work teams as dysfunctional work teams most of the time. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Let's just say that.
Yeah. No, at a former company I was at, we nicknamed somebody director of no, right?
Yeah.
And that was their job. That was their job because they were keeping me in line for my, entrepreneurial manicness going astray. And so we needed you probably heard this before, but a lot of CEOs will surround themselves with yes men. She was my no woman. So, and I think a good CEO will surround themselves with a no woman or a no man, right? So,
yes.
Excellent. So, so your most recent book came out last year, 2020. So really just in time for the pandemic when peer groups probably took off more and more online, right? And it's called Peer Nation, right? So.
Peer innovation, yeah. And so it becomes really people like me in innovation, creativity realized, and you kind of put those together. And I think obviously our innovation takes place best when we work together. And actually, while there were some businesses that unfortunately literally had to shut down, which obviously would take them out of their peer group. But I think for others, they recognize that it's times like these when you need your peers most, why would you want to go through it alone when it comes to a pandemic or anything else, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and the same held true for the 2008 financial crisis. Now, in that case, people could actually prepare for it in a way that made a big difference too. This time, everyone was pretty well, blindsided. But again, under those circumstances, they felt like, wow, I'd rather be part of a group than out by myself. And I
Yeah.
think it worked out for a lot of them. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Leo, this has been wonderful. If our Gonzo family wants to reach out to you and maybe have a discovery call or learn more about how you could help them, what's the best way to get in touch with you, or best ways, I should say?
They can do that. So they can go to my website at leobottary.com, leobottary.com, or they can also go to peernovation.co, which takes you really to the same place. And then my calendar is always right there in the contacts. They can, just look up my calendar, just book some time. And, I'd love to speak with them about how they could bring peer innovation into their company. And I think at a time right now, which is so critical, is everyone's figuring out what's next and what to do. What have we learned about our teams and how do we take the next steps forward? I think it's a pretty good time to have these intentional conversations. So I'm hoping that people and more people want to do that.
Excellent, Leo. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I truly appreciate it. Appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
I appreciate you as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks for all that you're doing. And I wish you continued massive successes. I think peer groups are going to become more and more part of the norm, right? And especially with all the, as we talk about, all the online options. And I would just add, if you can diversify your peer group, and I'm not only talking about race and gender, but also globally, because I'm getting so much value of connecting with people around the world. Being here in America, we think we know all the answers, and then you talk to somebody from the Netherlands, Spain, France, South Africa, Australia. I'm like, wow, what a great different perspective. And
exactly.
And plus it's just so heartening to experience all the different cultures. And so maybe that's your next book, right? So
we'll see. I don't know. I like your passion around this, though. I like it. I think it'll be infectious. So appreciate that.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Leo. Appreciate it. I want to thank the Gonzo family for listening and or watching. Appreciate it. Please stay tuned every Wednesday morning. Like I said, we have a brand new episode. I hope that we can continue to help you. Thanks again for sharing your heartbeats with us today. I wish you all the best, and make sure to stay awesome.